Falling in love is often portrayed as a joyful and exhilarating experience. Yet many men, just as they begin to feel deeply connected to someone, instinctively withdraw. This paradoxical behavior can be perplexing, especially for their partners, who may interpret it as a sign of disinterest or emotional unavailability. However, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow offers a profound psychological explanation for this reaction. The shadow represents the unconscious, repressed aspects of the psyche, parts of ourselves that we either deny or fail to recognize. For men, especially those conditioned by societal norms of strength and independence, the experience of love can bring their hidden fears and vulnerabilities to the surface, triggering a defensive retreat. The fear of surrender in love is deeply intertwined with the shadow self. Many men grow up with messages that equate emotional openness with weakness. From an early age, they are often encouraged to suppress their feelings, to be strong, and to avoid anything that makes them appear vulnerable. As a result, their emotional wounds and insecurities are pushed into the unconscious, forming part of their shadow. When love enters their lives, it acts as a mirror, reflecting back the very emotions they have spent years suppressing. Suddenly, they are confronted with the fear of losing control, of exposing their inner wounds, and of facing parts of themselves they have long ignored. One of the most common fears that emerge from the shadow is the fear of abandonment or rejection. If a man has unresolved emotional wounds, perhaps from childhood experiences, past relationships, or family dynamics, falling in love can unconsciously remind him of those painful moments. Even if his current relationship is healthy and loving, his shadow may react defensively, convincing him that withdrawing is the safest option. This explains why many men seem to pull away just when a relationship starts to deepen. They are not necessarily rejecting love, but rather protecting themselves from the unconscious fears it awakens. Another aspect of the shadow that contributes to this fear of surrender is the loss of identity. In Jungian psychology, personal growth often involves integrating the shadow, accepting all aspects of oneself rather than repressing them. However, for many men, the idea of surrendering to love feels like a threat to their autonomy. They may fear that by fully embracing their emotions, they will lose control over their sense of self. This internal conflict creates resistance, making them hesitate or withdraw when love starts to demand a deeper emotional presence. Jung believed that true individuation, the process of becoming a whole integrated self, requires confronting and integrating the shadow. For men who struggle with the fear of surrender, this means recognizing their unconscious fears, understanding their roots, and allowing themselves to embrace vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. Instead of running from love, they must learn to see it as an opportunity for self-discovery and healing. Only by facing their shadows can they truly open themselves to love without fear. Romantic love is not just an individual experience. It is shaped by deep, unconscious patterns that Carl Jung referred to as archetypes. Archetypes are universal symbols and themes embedded in the collective unconscious, influencing human behavior and relationships in ways we may not fully realize. When men fall in love, they often do so through the lens of these archetypes, which dictate how they perceive love, their role in relationships, and their emotional responses. Among the most significant archetypes that shape the male experience of love are the hero, the lover, and the puer aeternus, eternal boy. The hero archetype is one of the most dominant influences on men, especially in Western culture, where they are conditioned to believe that love must be won through conquest, sacrifice, or proving their worth. The hero is strong, independent, and often reluctant to show vulnerability. While this archetype can make a man passionate and determined in the pursuit of love, it can also create an internal conflict once the initial quest is over. When love is no longer something to be fought for, but instead something that requires emotional surrender, the hero archetype may trigger resistance. Many men feel unsure of how to navigate love beyond the stage of pursuit, leading them to pull away just as they begin to develop deep feelings. The lover archetype, on the other hand, represents emotional intensity, passion, and a deep connection, with beauty and sensuality. A man strongly influenced by this archetype is often open to love, embracing emotional expression and intimacy. However, if the lover archetype is not balanced by other aspects of the psyche, it can lead to instability, impulsivity, or a tendency to idealize the partner. When reality does not align with the fantasy, disappointment can cause withdrawal. Some men distance themselves not because they do not love their partner, but because they struggle with reconciling their romantic ideals with the imperfections of real relationships. Another crucial archetype influencing male relationships is the pure eternus, or eternal boy. This archetype embodies youthful passion, freedom, and a reluctance to commit to responsibility. Men dominated by this archetype may feel intensely drawn to love, but fear the weight of emotional dependence and obligation. They may be deeply affectionate and romantic in the early stages of a relationship, but withdraw when love demands maturity and consistency. This fear is not necessarily about the partner or the relationship itself. It stems from an unconscious resistance to growing up, confronting responsibilities, and accepting the limitations of real-world love. Understanding these archetypes helps explain why men often react paradoxically to love. The unconscious tension between these different aspects of the psyche, between the hero's need for conquest, the lover's desire for passion, and the eternal boy's fear of responsibility, creates inner conflict. To fully embrace love, men must become aware of these patterns and integrate them consciously. Love should not be viewed as a battlefield to conquer, an unattainable fantasy, or a threat to freedom, but rather as a transformative experience that requires balance, growth, and self-awareness. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask we wear to interact with the external world, a socially constructed identity that helps us navigate different roles in society. For men, this persona is often shaped by cultural expectations of strength, independence, and emotional self-control. While the persona serves an important function, allowing individuals to adapt to social norms, it can also become a barrier to authentic emotional experiences, particularly in love. When a man begins to fall deeply in love, his persona may come into conflict with his true emotions, leading him to withdraw rather than risk exposing his vulnerability. From an early age, many men are conditioned to believe that emotional restraint is a sign of masculinity. They are taught to suppress feelings of fear, sadness, and even deep affection, associating emotional openness with weakness. This conditioning becomes embedded in their persona, creating a false sense of detachment. As a result, when love starts to break through this emotional armor, the immediate reaction may be resistance. Rather than confronting their emotions directly, some men retreat behind their persona, adopting an attitude of indifference or avoidance to protect themselves from emotional exposure. This mask of indifference is not necessarily a conscious decision, but rather a defense mechanism triggered by the unconscious. A man who is deeply in love may feel overwhelmed by emotions he has never fully processed before. He may not know how to express vulnerability without feeling as though he is compromising his sense of self. In response, he instinctively distances himself, either by becoming emotionally unavailable, creating conflict, or retreating into solitude. This is often misunderstood by his partner as rejection, when in reality, it is a struggle between his conditioned persona and his true emotional self. Another reason men withdraw in the face of love is the fear of losing control. The persona gives a sense of stability and predictability, allowing a man to navigate his life in a way that aligns with societal expectations. Love, however, is unpredictable and requires a level of emotional surrender that may feel threatening. If a man's identity is strongly tied to his persona, he may fear that love will dismantle his carefully constructed sense of self. He may worry about becoming too emotional, too dependent, or too vulnerable, all qualities that contradict the persona he has built over time. However, Jungian psychology emphasizes that true growth and individuation occur when a person integrates all aspects of themselves, including the parts they have hidden behind the persona. For a man to fully experience love, he must recognize when his persona is acting as a barrier rather than a tool. Instead of retreating behind indifference, he must learn to embrace vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. Love challenges the persona because it demands authenticity. It requires a man to go beyond his social mask and connect with his true self. Only by doing so can he build a relationship based on genuine emotional depth rather than fear-driven avoidance. In Jungian psychology, the anima represents the feminine aspect of a man's unconscious mind. It is the deep, internal connection he has with emotions, intuition, creativity, and relationships. Jung believed that every man carries an inner feminine energy, just as every woman possesses an inner masculine counterpart, the animus. The way a man relates to his anima profoundly influences his approach to love, intimacy, and vulnerability. If he has not integrated this aspect of himself, he may struggle with emotional depth, leading to withdrawal just when love begins to demand true openness. From an early age, many men are discouraged from embracing their anima. Society often teaches them that emotions should be controlled, that sensitivity is a weakness, and that rationality should dominate their decisions. As a result, their anima becomes repressed, relegated to the unconscious, where it manifests in ways they do not fully understand. This can lead to emotional conflicts in relationships, as the man projects his inner feminine qualities onto his partner rather than recognizing them within himself. Instead of embracing his own need for emotional connection, he may become dependent on his partner to express those feelings for him, creating an imbalance in the relationship. One of the most significant ways an unintegrated anima affects love is through idealization. A man who has not fully acknowledged his inner feminine may see his partner as the embodiment of everything he lacks within himself. He projects his anima onto her, making her responsible for his emotional fulfillment. This kind of projection can create unrealistic expectations and deep disappointment when his partner inevitably falls short of the idealized image he has constructed. When faced with this disillusionment, he may withdraw, not realizing that the problem lies within his own unconscious rather than in the relationship itself. Another way the anima influences male withdrawal is through emotional avoidance. A man, disconnected from his anima, may find it difficult to process deep emotions, preferring to retreat into logic, work, or distractions rather than confront his inner world. When love starts to stir deep emotions, he may feel uncomfortable, as it forces him to face aspects of himself that he has long ignored. Instead of embracing the emotional intensity, he may pull away, fearing that engaging too deeply will make him lose control. However, Jung emphasized that integrating the anima is essential for a man's psychological wholeness. This means embracing his emotions, allowing himself to be vulnerable, and recognizing that sensitivity and intuition are not weaknesses, but strengths. A man who acknowledges his anima does not fear love. He understands that deep emotional connection is a path to self-discovery rather than a threat to his identity. By learning to engage with his anima rather than project it onto his partner, a man can form healthier, more balanced relationships. Instead of withdrawing, he can meet love with openness, seeing it not as something to fear, but as an opportunity to become more whole. True intimacy begins when a man stops running from his emotions and starts listening to the voice of his inner self. Falling in love is one of the most transformative experiences in life, yet for many men, it triggers deep-seated fears that lead them to withdraw just when emotional intimacy begins to deepen. As explored in previous chapters, these fears stem from unconscious psychological forces, the shadow, archetypes, the persona, and the anima, all of which shape how men experience love and vulnerability. However, Jungian psychology offers a path forward. By recognizing and integrating these unconscious elements, men can move beyond fear and fully embrace love as a force for personal growth and self-discovery. The first step in overcoming the fear of love is self-awareness. A man must begin by acknowledging his own emotional patterns. Does he tend to withdraw when relationships become serious? Does he avoid deep emotional discussions? Does he fear losing control or becoming too vulnerable? These patterns are not random. They are reflections of deeper unconscious fears that have likely been with him for much of his life. By becoming aware of these tendencies, he can start to separate himself from them rather than being controlled by them. Another crucial step is facing the shadow, the hidden parts of the self that contain unresolved fears, insecurities, and past wounds. If a man has experienced emotional pain in the past, whether from childhood experiences, past relationships, or cultural conditioning, he may unconsciously carry these wounds into his present relationships. Instead of running from them, he must confront them directly. This process often involves inner work, such as therapy, journaling, meditation, or deep self-reflection, to uncover the root causes of his fears. Only by bringing these unconscious wounds into the light can he begin to heal them. Equally important is redefining masculinity. Many men withdraw from love because they have been conditioned to believe that emotional vulnerability is a weakness. However, Jungian psychology suggests that true strength lies in wholeness, embracing all aspects of oneself, including emotions, intuition, and sensitivity. A man who integrates these qualities does not lose his masculinity. Rather, he becomes more complete. Love, instead of being seen as a loss of control, becomes a journey toward greater self-awareness and emotional depth. One of the most practical ways to overcome the fear of love is through conscious communication. Many men struggle with expressing emotions because they have never been taught how. However, emotional honesty does not require grand gestures. It begins with small, intentional steps. Learning to express fears, desires, and uncertainties within a relationship fosters trust and deepens intimacy. The more a man practices emotional openness, the easier it becomes to embrace love without fear. Ultimately, embracing love fully is about integration, bringing together all aspects of the psyche, from the shadow to the anima, and allowing love to be a transformative force rather than something to fear. Love is not meant to diminish a man, but to expand him, offering a path to greater self-awareness, authenticity, and connection. By confronting his fears rather than running from them, a man can break free from unconscious patterns and experience love in its truest, most profound form.